Welcome, everybody, to our next session of exploring the elements and interconnectedness of our local food system. We're really pleased to have you here again today. And our objectives for our series really is to help you better understand the unique characteristics of our local food system and to be able to identify some of the opportunities that we might need to strengthen our local food system and to better understand how you can become more involved in our community and our food system. So this is a visual that can kind of be a little overwhelming of the complexity of our food system. And you can see there's multiple layers from different perspectives, both from the farming perspective, the consumer perspective, and then kind of illustrates the environments in which both farming happen and also us as consumers and the interrelatedness. And so we're going to explore that today and with Gordon, our speaker. But before we get to him, I just want to, again, thank our sponsors and cooperators who are many of the folks who are involved in our local food system. So without any further ado, I want to introduce our topic, and that is exploring fruit and vegetable production within our regional food system. And our speaker today is Gordon Johnson. And I've known Gordon for, we were talking this morning, 28 years. And he is an assistant professor and an extension specialist regarding fruits and vegetables with the University of Delaware Department of Plant and Soil Sciences. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Gordon.
All right, thank you, Maria. As Maria said, I'm going to talk about the fruit and vegetable industry and how fruit and vegetables are handled throughout our region. And so hopefully throughout the day, if you have any questions, type in the chat and I'll be able to get to those by the end of the session. One of the things that I'm fortunate enough to be involved in is working with fruits and vegetables from the industry side, the extension side, from the grower side, and even the consumer side. I myself am a small grower. I have a 4-acre peach orchard, sell directly to the public. So it's interesting to understand what consumers want too. But the good thing about fruits and vegetables is that we want you to eat more of them. The USDA, that's part of their real push, is to get more fruit and vegetable consumption. This is a Harvard slide where they took the My Plate, and as you can see, about half of what you're supposed to eat during the day are vegetables and fruits. Delmarva's a very interesting place. It's been a really important place for growing vegetables and fruits for a century and a half. Once they built railroads coming down into the peninsula, that produce that was grown here could go up the peninsula and to Philadelphia, up to New York City. So we had it was actually probably one of the market gardens for the East Coast at one time. And we still are to some degree. You can see the peninsula covers the 3 counties of Delaware, the Eastern Shore counties, Cecil, Kent, Queen Anne's, Caroline, Dorchester, the Wicomico, Worcester, and Somerset, and then the 2 counties, Accomack and Northampton. Of these, probably the largest amount of vegetables and fruits are grown in Kent and Sussex County, Delaware, and then Caroline, Dorchester, and Wicomico County, Maryland, and then Accomack County, Virginia. Those would be where we have, not that there aren't vegetables and fruits grown in the other counties, but that's where we concentrate. Well, start off talking about part of the industry that you're probably not as familiar with, which is our processing vegetable industry. We are a major area in the East Coast that produces vegetables that go into freezing and some canning. In Delaware, we've had generally over 30,000 acres go into processing. Maryland, almost 20,000 acres. And then you can see Pennsylvania has significant acres, and as well as New Jersey and some in Virginia. You can see the sign there for Hanover Foods. That's one of the companies that has processing plants both in Maryland and in Delaware, as well as up in Pennsylvania in the Hanover area. One of the things that our processors, to remain competitive, they're always trying to make sure that they have stable markets and that they are growing products and processing products that will produce a profit. There's competition within the region, there's competition within the country. They need a they need to diversify their sources so that they don't depend on any one particular area for everything. They're actually even sourcing globally. A lot of vegetables come out of Central America that get processed. And then they're always working on when they want the product and how to time production of that product. We have both family and corporate companies that own processing. The majority are family, although we have had, for example, Vlasic was bought by a holding company, and so it became a corporate company that then moved out of our region. So this will be an example of a large processing vegetable grower, one of the largest in the East Coast, West Farms. And the bulk of our processing vegetables are machine harvested. So that is one thing that makes it different than our fresh market vegetables, is that here you see machines that are used to harvest lima beans and peas. And some of the labels that are produced on the peninsula, which Pick Sweet has a plant in Bridgeville, Delaware. Hanover has plants in Clayton, Delaware, as well as in Ridgely, Maryland. Friels has a plant in Queen Anne's County, Maryland. B&G has a plant in Dorchester County, Maryland. And Seabrook, they do not have a plant on the peninsula. Theirs is in southern New Jersey, but they source a good deal of their product out of Delmarva. Wouldn't be a talk about vegetables on Delmarva without mentioning the lima bean. We are one of the major lima bean producing regions in the country. And so our processors largely are here because of lima beans. We learned how to grow lima beans. It's a good area to grow them. So we have experienced growers. We also have a major research program on lima beans, one of two in the country, at the University of Delaware. The other being at the University of California, Davis. So we're only major East Coast production area. There's production in Northern New York and Ontario and Wisconsin, and a little bit in the Midwest. But for the East Coast, there is no other area that produces lima beans. That's what a full lima bean crop looks like just before it's going to be harvested. Other processing vegetables that are grown and processed here on Delmarva are peas. We don't grow as many peas as we used to, simply because they can be grown all throughout the northern part of the US equally as well. We grow them here mainly to get the factories up and operating before lima beans come in. Sweet corn is also a major crop. We grow about third of the sweet corn is grown for fresh market, the corn on the cob that you see in the farm stands, but 2/3 of the sweet corn grown here on Delmarva is grown for processing, both for freezing and for canning. Usually around 10,000 acres for processing, and then 4,000 acres for fresh market in Delaware, and then acreage in Maryland for sure. That's what a sweet corn harvester looks like. So it's snapping off the ears. Those ears will then go to a factory. They'll get cooked, husk cooked, and then the kernels will be taken off the cobs. And then they'll either be frozen or canned. Another industry you may not know that we have here and have had for decades is a pickling cucumber industry. So we have one pickle plant still left on the peninsula. We did have a big one, classic, that left, but we're still producing cucumbers for pickling, and they're being shipped to Michigan, shipped to North Carolina, as well as being processed here on the peninsula. So we have about 5,000 acres. The machine you see there in the picture is actually a pickle harvester, where it picks up the vines, it pinches the pickles off, grades them, gets rid of the little ones and big ones, and then they go into a bin that goes into trucks that go into a pre-processing plant in Bridgeville, where they wash and grade them, and then they go to the pickling companies throughout the eastern US. We also do have processing snap beans, and so Hanover Foods would be a major processor of snap beans. So some of that is grown on Delmarva, probably, in the 3,000 or 4,000 acre range. And so that's another crop that is grown and processed here in our region. Pennsylvania will be the major processor of snap beans in the mid-Atlantic. We do have a processing potato industry that developed in the Dorchester County area on the East Shore of Maryland with a company called Black Gold, and they're selling to Frito-Lay's, the chip companies that make potato chips. Tomatoes are kind of an interesting history. If you go throughout Delmarva, every little town or a town of any size had a tomato processing plant back in the 20s and 30s. They are all gone now. We have a processor in the region that works out of Pennsylvania, Fermanos, that does contract some acres down here. But we went from 22,000 acres, this is just in Delaware, in 1920 to less than 200 acres. So interesting there. Vegetable industries move where it's cheapest to grow. Almost all the tomato production moved to California. We do have interesting processing industry, brown peppers. So that's B&G Foods, and they produce things like you say there, the hot pepper rings, jalapenos, and cherry peppers. Small acreage, most of it's hand harvested. We used to have significant spinach acres. We still do. Seabrook and Hanover both contract for spinach production to go into frozen spinach products. But it has declined somewhat because it is a kind of a difficult crop to grow. So it requires grower expertise, and there's always a chance of losing a crop. And just to end up on the processing side, some of the other fruits and vegetables that have been processed on Delmarva, at least in the last 10 years that I've worked with, we are growing sweet potatoes for processing now. We did not have that 5 years ago. So here you can see Jerry Ryder, who is one of the families who's growing sweet potatoes for Hanover Foods. We're growing edamame, the edible soybean, also on limited acres, but being grown here on Peninsula. We've grown processing squash for years and years. Most recently, a couple of years ago, we were growing it. We've had cabbage growers to grow for the slaw and sauerkraut market. So they grow their crop and it would go for processing. I think our last grower that sent anything for processing was about 2 years ago. We've grown a wide range of greens, collards, kale, mustard, turnip for processing. Again, that industry has stopped in our region, moved mostly to the south of us. Black-eyed peas, Townsend's, when they were in business, canned black-eyed peas, or froze black-eyed peas. One of our companies was growing beets and did that, found that it could be grown here for processing. On the East Shore of Virginia, there were watermelons that are being grown for the fresh cut market. And then some of our bigger orchards in the area where they have excess apples or apples that can't go into the fresh market, they'll sell those for the cider market. So that's kind of a quick round about our processing vegetable industry. So in that processing vegetable industry, the processor determines what they want to have grown. They will contract acres with the grower. Generally, they're providing the seed. They're providing pest management or services to the grower, and they harvest the crop for the grower. Now, not always. There are some growers that have their own harvesters. They're very expensive. You're looking at $500,000 for a pea or Lima bean harvester. So not every grower is going to have one. So most of the acreage is harvested by the processors. And then what the grower provides is they plant the crop and then they take care of the crop. Most of our acres are irrigated, so they'll irrigate the crop, manage the pests in the crop. But it is contracted acres, so the grower does not make the decisions as what to grow, how much to grow, and when to grow. That's all being done in coordination with the processor. All right, I'll move on to our fresh market vegetables. This picture here is a picture of a fresh market sweet corn harvester, which if you didn't notice from the previous one with the processing sweet corn, it's a different head. In this case, the ear is pulled up, a little knife cuts it off, so it's not really snapped, so it doesn't get any bruising at the base as you would with a processing sweet corn. So again, specialized machines. I would say of our fresh market sweet corn, I would say probably over half is machine harvested, and then the rest on the smaller acreage is all hand harvested. This would be a picture coming out of one of our fresh market wholesale sweet corn producers. So they put them in these wire-bound crates, wooden crates, for a specific reason, in that they need to cool the corn down. And how they do that is by passing cold water through it. So they need a container that will allow cold water pass through it. So that's why they use these wire-bound wooden crates. Here you have a line of our labor in the sweet corn packing house. And what they're doing is they're removing off the bottom, the butts of the corn that are too long to pack, removing any that are not proper size, and then they're packing them into crates. So one of the differences between processing vegetables and fresh market vegetables is that there's a much higher need for labor in our fresh market vegetables. We still need labor in the processing plants for processing vegetables. They'll have crews that pick out any things that would be you wouldn't want to go into a freezing or canning. So pieces of plant that aren't a pea, odd shaped peas or corn. A lot of this is actually done now using sorting machines, color sorters. So there's fewer people in a processing plant prepping. Although, like with pickles, there's still quite a bit of a crew there to remove the pickles that aren't of appropriate size and shape. But with fresh market, as you can see here, there's a full crew, and the bulk of our labor force for fresh market vegetables is, of course, migrant labor. So we do have some residential labor here where folks have moved into the area and stayed here. But because it's seasonal, most of our labor force will come from migrants that are coming up from Florida, coming in from Puerto Rico, coming in from Mexico. Some of these are what you call H-2A workers, where they're actually permitted to come into the US for the growing season and then need to return home. So this is one of our biggest issues. And then finding housing. Some farms have housing for the workers, others do not, where the workers have to find their own housing. Oftentimes the workers are part of a labor crew where they'll have a crew head who actually does all the contracting and working out with a farmer what the labor's supposed to do, and then they actually manage the labor, making sure there are enough people there to do the job for any given day. So this is one part of the industry that a lot of folks don't realize, that for our larger farms, we do use quite a bit of migrant labor. Here you can see they're putting those crates in, stacking them, and after they come out of, you see a cooler over here that's shooting cold water over the sweet corn, and then they'll go into a cold box to preserve. So packing sheds have areas where they're washing, where they're grading, where they're sorting, and then where they're cooling, which is interesting to be around. This is another crop that is very important for fresh market growers, and that is watermelons. We're probably the northernmost major watermelon growing region in the East Coast. Once you get north of here in Pennsylvania, Jersey, they just don't have enough heat, enough day length, and so to grow watermelons as well as we can here. So once we get past the second week in July, most of the watermelons on the East Coast are coming out of Delaware and Maryland and being shipped up, further north. So that's another interesting point, that our watermelon industry has a market from about the third week in July through Labor Day and supplies most of the watermelons. Believe it or not, our main competitor is Indiana during that time. And so Indiana is generally providing the Midwest, Chicago, Kansas City, that part of the country, while we're supplying New York and Baltimore, New York, Boston, those areas. Although if we're short, they'll start coming our way from Indiana. If they're short, we'll start shipping that direction. So as you can probably think, watermelons are a real heavy item. And so the big cost in marketing watermelons is trucking or shipping. So the closer you are to the market, the better off you are from a competitive standpoint. Picture of one of our growers who grows several hundred acres of cabbage. So we do have other growers of larger size that are producing quantities of vegetables that go into wholesale markets. I'll talk a little bit more about this, but we are also one of the areas of the East that produce potatoes in a particular window. Our potato industry has suffered greatly, largely through attrition from older growers who just did not have any family members take over operations. And because, the industry has ups and downs, so it's a lot of risk involved. So this is, and I'll talk a little bit more about what industries we've lost from a fruit and vegetable standpoint. Then I'd be remiss to not mention our small growers. And there's certain things that we love to grow on Delmarva. And one here you can see is pole lima beans. It's considered almost a gourmet item for a lot of folks. Everybody loves their butter beans. And it's a crop that's difficult to grow because it doesn't like heat. And what do we have in the summer? We have heat. So this is one that if we could grow it more successfully, we'd have a lot more income for small farms, because it is a very profitable crop when it gives you a crop. This is a picture of a strawberry field that's being covered overwintered with a row cover to keep it from being damaged by the cold. And so this would be something that's done on small acreage. We don't have any growers of over, um, of over 20 acres. Most of it's less than that. But it is a very profitable crop for small farms. And so this is one that I always like working with growers who want to get started in a fruit or vegetable. This is one I think is very profitable. But because everything's hand harvested, you see a lot of money involved in plants and such. Does cost quite a bit of money to grow. So it takes some expertise to learn how to do it well. And just some other scenes from other farms I've been on over the years. This would be what I call a medium-sized grower, his tomato field that he's planted and is now staking. This would be a common sight throughout Delmarva, being tomatoes are a really important crop for local markets. We only have a handful of wholesale growers here, but we do have almost every vegetable farm that has a diverse operation grows tomatoes for local markets. This is a squash field. So we've had, as I said, in the past, processing squash, but again, this is a staple on almost all of our vegetable farms. And then we've have a lot of folks that are selling their products at their farm. So they'll have their own farm markets, or they'll have their own stands or areas where they do sell their produce. So a lot of them have moved on to the web and have a web component that is important for their sales, as you can see here. So this has probably been one of the bigger changes for our farms that do sell on their farm is electronic media and using that as part of their platform to reach their customers. We do have different growers associations on the peninsula. The Maryland Delaware Watermelon Association is one of those. I spoke at their meeting back in February. They represent the watermelon industry. They're also part of a unique tradition that you'll see in a lot of our commodities, but they have a queen contest, and then that queen becomes an ambassador for watermelons, and she'll go and speak all over the region promoting watermelons. So that's kind of something out of you wouldn't think would still exist nowadays, but it does. And this is one of those traditional things that is unique for a lot of our if you look at the food systems, what part of the food systems would you have an ambassador for a commodity? So this is really interesting. Just to mention what we do in Extension, as far as interacting with fruit and vegetable growers and buyers and brokers and processors, is that we're conducting applied research to assist in making sure that issues involving one of those fruits or vegetables is addressed. So we're all the time interacting with the industry to see what the research needs are. And when I say applied research, I mean we're out in the field doing field trials, and may have a variety trial. We might have a trial on fertilizer. We might have a trial on using compost, trying to grow organic, all kinds of different things as the industry directs. As I said, the university has been one of the areas of expertise we've developed has been with lima beans. We have numerous faculty that work on lima beans, largely on diseases. And then we have a Lima Bean breeder at our station, Emily Ernest, who will be speaking to you later on in this series about climate change. But she is breeding improved varieties better adapted for our area. We have to work with regulations. Probably the biggest regulation that I have to educate growers and those in the industry too has been with produce food safety. With the Food Safety Modernization Act, fresh consumed produce is now under regulation. Farms are being inspected by the Department of Agriculture to comply with the federal regulations. And what I do, along with a number of my colleagues, other extension colleagues, is we do training. So I, for example, have an 8-hour training on Wednesday where we are taking through the whole what's all in the Food Modernization Act from the produce rule, making sure that folks are able to comply with it. Certainly we give production recommendations. We have a very, very good commercial vegetable production recommendation guide that's developed from states throughout the region: Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Maryland, Delaware, Virginia, and West Virginia. We all work on that together. We do production economics, looking at cost of production. And again, we're out trying to address current issues. So every year there seems to be a new pest, or every couple of years. For example, in blackberries and raspberries, we had a little fruit fly that came in about 8 years ago now that is really difficult to control. That lays eggs, and that would be an example of a pest that just came in. And of course, we do grower meetings, specific issue meetings, field days and tours. We'll do on-farm research trials where we take our research that we may do on a small plot level and do it out on farms. Workshops, classes, and short courses. Last 2 years, these were mostly online. We're getting back to doing them in person now. We'll get industry roundtables where we'll get everybody in industry together to discuss issues. Crop schools and fieldman schools we've done over the years. Fieldmen or field person schools would be where we're training the people in the processing industry that work with the growers. And again, we have newsletters, fact sheets, and so one of our main ways we get information out in Delaware is through a weekly crop update. Maryland has a Maryland Vegetable News. So these are ways that we also reach out to the industry. And of course, we produce research reports. All right, so let's look at, I'm going to focus more on Delaware right now because that's what I know the best. Although, you think that we're also mirroring this on the Maryland side and to some degree on the Virginia side. So we've had about 50,000 acres of vegetables in Delaware for the last 40 years, with about a third being fresh market and 2/3 being processed. And it's brought in about $50 million. That's just in the product. The value of the product does not include multipliers like the folks that work in the industry, people that are employed by the industry. Our primary drivers are probably, as you can see, these 4 crops with lima beans and pickles on the processing side, and then watermelons and sweet corn on the fresh market, in case of sweet corn, also processing side. Again, a picture of fresh market sweet corn being harvested. Again, our most important fresh market crop, apart from sweet corn, is watermelons. We have on Delmarva about 5,000 acres. We use a very intensive system to grow them. We're growing almost all seedless watermelons. They require pollinizer plants to put in to provide the pollen to pollinate the seedless female flowers. We're growing them using a system called plastic culture, where they're grown on black plastic mulch with drip irrigation. And again, as I said, we have very established markets during that July, August, and early September window for our crop. Let's talk about some of the crops that we've lost or which we've really reduced acres over the years. Cantaloupes or melons would be an example, where we used to grow several thousand acres on the peninsula. And then we really reduced acres in the 80s, gained some back in the 90s. And then it's all pretty much gone to just local, growing for local markets now. We have no wholesale. One here, you probably wouldn't realize this, but the main reason folks got out of cantaloupes for shipping is from a produce food safety standpoint. We had several major food-borne illness outbreaks in cantaloupes in the country, and our growers just don't want to take the risk. Watermelons, there's no risk or little risk with, so they're not going to risk. So what cantaloupes we do produce is mainly for farm stands that we have around the peninsula. Another industry that's interesting in its decline has been our fresh market potatoes. Delaware's got an interesting history in that we had a migration of farmers from Long Island, New York. Once Long Island, particularly the western part of Long Island, got built up, they decided to move down to Delaware. They bought good land up and down Route 9, where we have some of our best soils. And so in the 50s, we were up to about 10,000 acres. Maryland also had some acres there. And then we had a second peak when that was hand dug potatoes. And then we moved to machine dug potatoes in the 80s. But our acreage has fallen dramatically on Delmarva. There's still a number of big farms on the eastern shore of Virginia. And we have 4 or 5 growers in Delaware, depending on the year, from a high of when I first started of about 15 growers. Main reason here is we're being hit by competition from North Carolina in particular. And they kept getting into our market window, and from when we first had a market window about 2 months, it got it to where we only had a market window of about 3 weeks where we could make good profit. The industry's changed quite a bit too. Used to be that all our growers would pack into little consumer packs that would go directly to brokers that sold them to supermarkets. Nowadays, they just pack them in big totes and they go to a repacker that will actually do that packing in consumer packs and marketing. Another crop that we lost on Delmarva that we're just getting back is sweet potato. In the 1920s, there were in Delaware alone, and East Shore, Maryland would have been probably more than this acres, almost 10,000 acres of sweet potatoes. Essentially what happened is we were outcompeted by North Carolina. North Carolina became the major sweet corn producer in the East. Just an interesting note, as I said, we have gained some acres in recent years because we have one of our processors that's growing sweet potatoes for processing. This is one crop that I always love promoting to our smaller growers because it is profitable for a small grower. It fills that window in the fall where they can have something very good, nutritious, and that's profitable to sell in the fall. So this is one I've always tried to encourage more production of. And just to think about the East Coast, where produce is coming from at any given time. As you know, winter production centered in Florida, and then as the late winter starts to break, we will move up into Georgia, which is a huge vegetable growing powerhouse. Then we'll move into South Carolina, then the Carolinas, and then eventually we'll wind up on Delmarva. This happens to be a map of a particular company that produces up and down the East Coast. So this is one way that our bigger produce companies provide a long season, is to have operations up and down the seaboard. And so versus California, they'll have longer growing seasons that can grow throughout the year. Now, there are different regions of California, Central Valley versus coastal production. Just to go over some of our vegetables that are grown for local markets. Number one probably would be tomato. This is one that anybody that has their own local market will want to grow because it's one of the things that people will buy. If you look at our farms, a roadside stand on Delmarva, I always say there's 5 things that you need to have on your market to be successful. You need tomatoes, you need sweet corn, you need cantaloupes, you need watermelons, and you need peaches. Of course, not everybody's going to grow peaches or watermelons or cantaloupes, but almost every small farm can grow tomatoes. And so those are big movers during the summer. Then just showing pictures from other farms. This happens to be Pulaski's up in Newcastle County, picking peppers. And of course, a wide range of things are grown on small farms or medium-sized farms. We have talked about some of our cabbage growers. We have small acres of broccoli and cauliflower, and then greens. Beans we talked about, we have some because we can, in some cases, we can mechanically harvest beans. We do have a few asparagus growers left, but the beets, carrots, all those root crops are grown on small farms. Cucumbers, probably more acreage across the peninsula. And lettuce is mainly a small farm crop. As you can see, all those others that you see there are small farm crops. One that we do have significant acreage all over the peninsula is pumpkins. Of course, we're not eating them. It's all for decoration, but is a major profit center for a lot of our farms. Summer squash almost is another one that's grown by almost every small farm. And so that's just an example of the wide range of things we can grow, and that's not a full list. Just an example of this would be the president of our Delaware Fruit and Vegetable Growers Association. This is his business, Shane Marble. So example of what I would call a mid-sized grower. It's not small, not like an acre. He's growing multiple acres of vegetable. Fruits are really interesting in that particularly Delaware, but Delaware and East Shore, Maryland were major fruit producing area 100 years ago. So in 1920, we had over 10,000 acres of apples. Now we have 350. Peaches, we had 12,000 acres. Now we're down to about 300. Pears, 5,000, less than 20 acres. Strawberries, 7,000 acres, now down to about 300 acres. Grapes, 2,200 acres, down to 40. And then blackberries, mainly blackberries, brambles, had 1,200 acres, down to less than 20. So this shows how things changed. At the one time, we were the major fruit producing area to ship to Philadelphia, New York City. But this has changed. A lot of reasons there. We had some disease issues that came in with the peaches, and then the economics. People were just able to grow, once like Washington State learned how to grow and cold store, control atmosphere, store apples. Our Eastern apple industry was not competitive. So there's still opportunities. I work with small growers. As I said, I'm a peach grower, but we're working with small growers and we've had several new orchards on a small scale go in with peaches and apples. Big area of interest, although I don't know if people are making a lot of money with it unless they are producing wine or wine grapes. So this is throughout the peninsula. We have various vineyards and small wineries. As I said, strawberries are still a very important crop for all small growers, and being a really popular fruit that can be grown and marketed during April, May, and June in Delaware and Maryland, East Shore, Maryland. Blueberries, New Jersey is a really big blueberry grower. We have had more interest in blueberries in recent years, and we've had more blueberry plantings go in over the last 10 years than probably decades previous. So this is one that there's potential, but remember, we're competing directly against New Jersey, who has thousands of acres of blueberries. And then brambles, particularly blackberries, are probably well adapted here, but again, our acreage is very small. So for our local vegetable and fruit supply, this would be on the farm markets, roadside markets, farmers markets, community support agriculture, local stores and small chains. Again, you can see different pictures here. If you see this picture here, this guy, I've had about 80 pounds more weight than what I looked like there. That was me selling at a farmer's market in Wilmington, actually. But scenes from different local sales. So our on-farm roadside markets, we have fewer than we used to, but they're still important. Farmers markets have grown in the region. I used to sell at several farmers markets at one time when I was a younger man. So I'd be over in the Baltimore area selling in over there. I'd be selling at places like Salisbury and Easton and in Maryland. We also had a number of very small growers that were very successful. You know, this is a picture of Bob Russell. He's since passed away, but he and his wife made a living selling directly to restaurants from their 1 acre property, made a full living doing it. So there's opportunities throughout the region, and we do have very small growers that are being successful doing things like this. Certainly, our growers have really benefited from the buy local trend, which really got pushed to the forefront during COVID, in that people really were looking for local product and are willing to support it. So this happens to be Pulaski's and their famous burlap bag sweet corn. So that's one thing that we did see on the peninsula, is that our local markets were strengthened during COVID with more increase in local sales and people picking up new and repeat customers that we think will have lasting effects. Community support agriculture expanded during COVID because we had problems getting product to the market. And so people decided to sell, try to sell directly via the share system. And we've had several new CSAs throughout the region start during this period. Certainly direct marketing's been a big push for a lot of our growers. This happens to be Bennett Orchards, who do you pick peaches, but there's examples of very successful you pick operations. So this is one that you know, we did manage to be able to do during COVID because it's outside and chance of transmission were low. And then the other thing that a lot of our farms have started adding is the agritourism. We're getting folks to the farm just to have fun. We've seen an increase in organic production throughout the region and having growers that are growing certified organic. We used to have an association in Delaware. It's no longer functioning, but Maryland has their Maryland Organic Food and Farming Association. And we have organic growers up and down the peninsula. One of our challenges has been how to comply with produce food safety and rules from the FDA, as well as the buyers wanting us wanting growers to have a food safety plan and being audited to make sure that they have good food safety on their farm. And then, as I said, one of our problems for our fresh market industry, and this is across the whole country, is getting labor. However, we do have some innovative growers doing some interesting things. The use of high tunnels has really benefited many growers from large to very small. So that's been a way that we've been able to provide food longer in the growing season and earlier in the growing season. And I'll finish up with where we're selling our products from wholesale end. So most of our vegetables, fruits are being sold through wholesale markets. So the vast majority on Delmarva, even though we've talked about all the local areas, they're going to market to a wholesaler or a repacker, and oftentimes they'll have a broker or buyer that is their middleman. So they don't have to actually do the selling. They have a broker that sells for them. Our canning and freezing, as we already mentioned, they are done in the region, contracted in the region, and then those processors, they actually do the wholesaling to their distributors. So if you see a Hanover food product in the frozen food aisle, they'll have gone through, say, the Food Lion buyer out of North Carolina. They'll deal with them. One issue with produce is it needs cold chain. So that means you need refrigeration throughout the cycle. So for a wholesale, they get cooled down and then they stay cool and until they get on the grocery shelf or being used in food service. And to think about how produce gets distributed, like food in general, you can see that we have a major Walmart distribution center here on the peninsula. Cisco is the big food service distributor, and we have one major distributor on the peninsula out of Pocomoke. So this is where growers would actually contract with those buyers for the companies, the distributors, and then they would deliver to their distribution center. And then that would go out to whether it's a superstore, or whether it's a university kitchen with Cisco. Produce is interesting, though. It does have a lot of special distributors that growers can sell to. A lot of them are headquartered out of Jessup, Maryland. And so I'll show you that in a little bit. We also do have wholesale markets in the area where people can go and buy fruits and vegetables wholesale. The biggest example would be the Philadelphia wholesale produce market. We do have produce auctions in the region. Some of them, most of them are up in Pennsylvania. We do have one on the peninsula. Need to also mention food banks and the donations or buying of food banks of produce, and then gleaning programs. There's, particularly in Maryland, there's been really, a group that organizes gleaning, which is taking produce that's left in the field and then putting it in for those in need. As I mentioned, most of our produce gets bought by consumers in the supermarket. And so most of our wholesale growers are going to be selling into those channels. Probably the one company that's really taken the heart of trying to source local and sell and promote locally produced produce would be Giant Foods. So anywhere there are giants, their buyers are looking for local produce to put in their stores. And of course, food service is a big buyer of produce. We've had during COVID, this was one area that got hit hard. So a lot of growers who were selling to food service had to pivot and start to sell to supermarkets. And that's not always easy to do quickly. Of course, there's produce in superstores, produce in our wholesale clubs, and produce in our convenience stores, and certainly produce going to institutions. Military, for example, is a big buyer of produce. Or caterers and restaurants, and then fast food. Fast food's interesting in that if McDonald's decides to change from 4 pickles to 3 pickles per burger, our pickle industry now has lost a huge chunk of pickle sales. So you wouldn't think that this would affect us locally, but it does. And then just re-mention alternative distribution, direct to consumer, selling to restaurants and chefs. We have a number of growers that do that, selling at auctions. Farm to school, that's been one that's been trying to be developed on a bigger scale so that we have our growers selling directly to the cafeterias, school cafeterias. And then this has been a big market for medium-sized growers, is selling to local retailers. We mentioned U-Pick. This is a way that a number of our growers have increased their sales. Farmers markets, farm stands, CSAs. And the last thing I'll mention is that there's been an increase in the development of wineries throughout Delmarva. We're not the best place to grow grapes for wines, but people are trying to do it. With that, that's my contact information, which they'll share with you. Yeah, well, a lot of questions we just answered. Do any of our growers sell directly to retail grocers? Usually they're growing through a broker or a buyer that will buy for that store. Although in the past we did have folks delivered right to the produce section of a store like Acme. Okay, housing boom, I'll let somebody else. Homegrown fruits and vegetables in Delmarva, yes. Yes, the grower could have multiple contracts with several companies.
I have a quick question, actually. In terms of wheat and grains, I know there's growing interest in bakeries to have local grains. Is any of that being grown in the area?
I think somebody else will talk to you about it, but the big thing that has been done is to source local barley for malt for beer production. Almost all of our, even though I'm a vegetable guy, almost all of our wheat ends up in Pennsylvania to go for flour. So if you have a Snyder's pretzel or Utz pretzel, those are probably a lot of that wheat came from our region.
Thank you, Gordon. You really covered a lot of ground and helped us to see kind of all the different layers of our fruit and vegetable production here. And you've kind of hinted at some of the reasons why there's been, either a decline or an increase in different kinds of products, which has been great. It helps us to kind of really see the nuances, whether it be regulation or, changes in the competition or demand for kind of space, right? The land. So, gosh, it's so complex. So thank you for trying to.
Sure. Yeah, one of the things that, a lot of stuff went west to California, but not a lot of that's going to come back east because the transportation cost is horrible and the West is running out of water. So, it does go in cycles, and I think East has potential to pick up a lot of fruit vegetable production in the future.
That's interesting to sort of think about the future and what's happening with the climate, right, and how that may impact things, and cost of the transportation and gasoline and whatnot, all of those other things that really impact the cost of food. So
yeah, a lot of folks don't realize something like the apple industry, the processing apple industry in the East really took a hit because they were importing things like apple juice from China at cheap. So there's that international piece that people don't even realize that could affect us locally.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you.
Mhm.
Any other last questions for Gordon? So if not, I just want to remind you that next week we are talking about our poultry and egg industry. So Georgie, you will love Georgie. She's wonderful. She is our extension agent that focuses on poultry, and she has a great sense of humor. So she came up with this title, What's in Your Basket, Chicken or Eggs? And so we'll be exploring poultry and egg production within our region. And so I hope you can join us next week. And then please take a moment and fill out the survey. I put it in the chat so you can go right there and fill it out. Won't take you long. We appreciate it, and we're using that information to really help us figure out what's next.